Hello, everyone. Happy Motivational Monday. My name is Kira. I am your host, and I have the lovely Susie Ruth with me here as my co-host. So she'll get a formal introduction in just a moment. You know the deal. I have some announcements for you while you're all are popping in. And yes, I start right on time at 11:30 because 30 minutes is not enough time to even have these conversations. So I'm going to use up all of the time that I have and if you're popping in a little bit later, that's fine. If you're watching the recording, perfect. Whatever works for you works for me. So, with all of that being said, it's another Monday, right? And it's also another large event day. So, for those of you who don't know what Life Guides is, and maybe you just got the email and you registered for the event, which actually I'm curious, drop 111 in the chat if this is your first time at any of our events. Drop 222 in the chat if you've been here before and you love us and you need to keep coming back for more because that's what I'm here for, right? But what you see is we've got two layers of life guides. You've got our events, which is what I host, and I bring our cool guides onto the scene to share their wisdom and their insight. And then we also have the one-on-one guide calls where the people that I bring forward, I mean, we have so many guides, I could never bring forward all of them, but I will do my very best to do so. A lot of them are busy too, but they get to have one-on-one calls with you, helping you navigate your life. And it doesn't have to be in a state of crisis. We could have this conversation today about grief being more than losing someone you love, and you realize that you've been silently grieving for 3 years, and you're like, oh shoot, maybe I should do something about that. Maybe Susie Ruth can help me, or maybe there's a different guide. So that's what Life Guides is. As far as the event side of things, we have our Motivational Mondays, which we do every Monday. These are our more niche, more short, more to the point, let's get your Monday started and your week started on the right foot. Then we have our larger Connect events, which are once a month. We have a 60-minute conversation. So it's more time for us to dive into these topics and to get a little bit more nuanced in things. And then the week after that, we have live mentorship where we help you get live feedback in these areas of life. So this month, all of Motivational Monday is emotional well-being, and all of our Rooted in Well-being, which is our larger series, is based on emotional well-being. So everything ties into each other. I'm a big fan of taking people on a journey because I like to go on a journey and I like to have a story and I like to grow. Also, you all provided your survey feedback results, and I don't have the exact number because I forgot to look, but you all provided your survey feedback results for how impactful the mental well-being month was for you last month. And in April, we did physical well-being. 88% of you saw an increase in your physical well-being exclusively in the month of April. And I'm pretty sure, looking at the numbers, it was close to 90 to 95% of you saw an increase in your mental well being in the month of May. So, June is emotional well being, and I'm so excited that we get to have these conversations with you. And before we dive in today, I have a couple of random announcements that I think you all will enjoy. So, I know a bunch of you love music. I just went to this amazing concert for one of my favorite artists this past Thursday. Was so amazing. His stage presence was phenomenal. But his music is very intentional. It's very empowering. It also has this like beat to it that makes you want to like get down and do something with his words. And his name is Anise, and this is his album. I just dropped it in the chat, but it's his Home Sick by Anise. That's his album if you don't have Spotify. Um, Also, a couple of other things that we've talked about throughout Motivational Monday. We've talked about the Whoop. We've talked about what are the other fitness trackers? The Apple Watches, all of these fitness trackers that track your heart rate variability, things in regards to your health. There's also a ring, and I got the ring. This is just a little trial before I get the ring, but I did order the ring to start tracking my sleep and to start tracking some of my feminine cycles as well. So I'm excited to let you guys know how this works. But I know some of you are very curious about things like that. Also, there have been some changes. Susie Ruth was here with us last month and the month prior, and you might see that her hair has changed. I also have changed my hair. I'm no longer rocking the bangs. And I think you'll see and you'll start noticing this pattern in your life. When people go through big changes, a lot of the times our hair accompanies that. And if you go into more of the spiritual practices, your hair holds memory. and you're changing your stories and letting go of things as you're changing your hair, right? So to see two women, we won't tell you all the deep details of our stories, but we're both in transition in a lot of layers of our life, and our physical appearance shows that. And without further ado, I'm going to intro Susie, and we are going to get started with today's conversation. Also, if you have any albums or any artists or any music that you love, you can share it in the chat every week. And even if I'm the only one listening to it, you best believe I'll be listening to it. So without further ado, we have Susie Ruth. She is our end of life doula, mind body life coach, and specialist in emotional healing. With over 30 years of experience in body work, she blends physical and emotional healing to guide clients through life's transitions and challenges. Drawing from the Body Keeps the Score, we talked about this book in May. It's a phenomenal book. I would suggest reading it, or I would suggest listening to it. Whatever way you can absorb this information, take it in. I'll drop that in the chat in just a moment. But drawing from The Body Keeps the Score, Susie recognizes that the body holds memories of past experiences and uses somatic practices to help clients reconnect, heal, and find balance. So today's conversation is a little bit more nuanced, right? It's about grief being more than losing someone you love. And the reason why that's important is because if we don't know what we're going through, we won't know how to get ourselves out of that. So before we dive deep into the conversation, Susie, can you give us maybe an overarching view of grief?
Yes, thank you. And it's nice to see everyone. There's like 60 people here, so that's pretty amazing. That's awesome. I'm super excited that this message is going to get spread around because I think that we are a very grief illiterate society. And we have been, we've talked about this before, Kira, that this pursuit of happiness in our country, like it's written into our Constitution, has caused us so much pain because
Mm-hmm.
we have found that sadness is there's a problem and we need to fix it. We need to get away from it. We need to take a pill for it. We need to do something about it. And the only thing that gets us to the wisdom and gifts that sadness brings into our lives is to actually feel it, go through it, let our body process it. It's the only way to really grow from grief. Otherwise, we try to get away from it, and then we tend to do what I've done my whole life, which is medicate with moving, move around the country, move around, different houses, whatever, just start to have a feeling, move away from it. Or, drink alcohol or overeat. All these things that we struggle with in society oftentimes comes from not wanting to feel the emotions that are associated with grief. And grief, there's so many different ways that grief comes into our experience in this lifetime, which is transitions. Anytime we have a transition, we're leaving one place to go to a next, and we leave that place that we left, like you and I are both transitioning. There's grief with that. I'm leaving my cabin in Northern California. I have grief associated with that. It's not just grief doesn't just come when we lose somebody. Oh, I got to put myself on focus. So anyway, I'm sorry, I jumped right in, but
That's
it's
beautiful.
a powerful subject to talk about, and it's my soapbox. It's what I do for a living. I love talking about grief and showing people that grieving is a powerful way to grow.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, you just covered a lot, but one thing I want to emphasize is that even the need to leave your current situation and run away to something else and fantasize about a better life elsewhere so that you don't have to deal with your stuff right here, that is grief. And I've done that. I spent 5 years doing that. And you know what happens at the end of that? Everything that you were running away from, you have to still acknowledge and you have to take responsibility for. So there's the idea of instant gratification and the idea of delayed gratification, and being on your grief journey and choosing to heal is that delayed gratification because it's not easy, right? You and I talked in May about IFS therapy. I just went back and did IFS therapy last week. And guess what came to the surface? Sadness. And I had to sit with sadness, and I had to talk to her, and I had to tell her, please don't overwhelm me. I didn't realize that that's how I felt, but I felt like sadness as a default was overwhelming. And I would use anger, Well, I would be afraid of that, and then I would cover it up with anger instead of actually expressing the sadness. And now I'm looking through all these layers of my life and I'm realizing all of the places that I've shown up in anger instead of being vulnerable and sad. Or even I didn't have to be vulnerable and sad with someone else, but even being vulnerable and sad with myself and acknowledging that. And now I'm going back and taking care of stuff that 7-year-old Kira was never taught. And it still lives inside of me 22 years later because I never worked through it and no one ever gave me the tools. And now I get to be a grown adult taking responsibility for myself and giving myself the tools. But that's a part of why these conversations are so huge because you might be running on default with things that you've had in your life forever. And if you were here in May, you heard that Susie's now dealing with things that happened to her when she was 2. It still lives inside of you. So, with that, I would love to hear more. Well, one, if you have anything to say in regards to what I just said, please drop that in. But then I also want to talk about the 6 gates of grief and what that looks like.
Yeah, so this is based on Francis Weller's book, The Wild Edge of Sorrow, and he's kind of my go-to person when we talk about what you can gain from grieving. But there are 6 gates of grief. So everything we love, we lose, which is what most people think about when they think about grief. Like we lose somebody we love, a dog dies, we lose a job, everything we love, we lose. But we also grieve the parts of ourselves that were never loved, the outcast parts of ourselves, the parts that were bullied when we were younger, the parts that we didn't love for ourselves. Like if we're overweight, we hate that part of ourselves. We grieve for that. We grieve for unmet expectations, these expectations that we have safety, belonging, and dignity when we're born into this human body. And if we didn't get safety, belonging, and dignity when we're kids, we carry grief with us. That's a huge unmet expectation. Or like the unmet expectation of, say, you're going to college to become a nurse and you meet the love of your life and get married and have kids. Even if you wanted to get married and have kids, you grieve the fact that you never became a nurse, the unmet expectations.
Mm.
We grieve for the sorrows of the world, everything that's happening around us. We have grief when we look at what's happening to the planet, when we see the polar bears, when we see the kids in Gaza. We have so much grief that we carry with that, right? Um, we grieve for our ancestors, just like trauma gets passed down from ancestor to ancestor. Grief does too. Like I'm carrying my mother's grief with me. And then we grieve the harm we've done. Like if we could have done, we all have that, if I knew better, I would do better. If I had known better, I would have done better. But we still created harm. If we weren't the best parent, if we weren't the best friend that we could have been, if we weren't the best sibling we could have been, if we bullied our kids, our kid's sister, if we tortured our younger siblings, we carry grief when we know better. So yeah, there's a lot of things we grieve. And so that's what I have to say about what we grieve. It's like everywhere. It's all around us.
Everywhere. And most people think that it is just losing someone you love, but realizing that life does what life is gonna do. That's like a guarantee. And we have to get okay with that. And it's not an easy journey, but it's an important journey. And I know, most people think that grief is just losing someone they love, but I'd love for you to share a little bit more about the myths of grief because
Yeah.
every time you share the myths of grief, I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm still, you and I have been having conversations for months. I'm still undoing all of it. So every time you share it, it imprints in me, and I know it'll be of benefit to everyone else here.
Yeah, so this comes from the grief recovery method. You could add that to the resources. There's a grief recovery method handbook. Um, so the grief recovery method talks about the 5 myths of grief. And this is kind of what we've learned especially in Western culture, how to deal with grief and how it gets passed down from our parents and our teachers. And then we think, oh, this is what we do. And I call it BRATS. I made an acronym. So busy, stay busy, go outside and play. R for replace the lost, we'll buy you a new one. Or, there's more fish in the sea, going through a heartbreak, and people are like, yeah, just meet somebody else. It'll be fine. A for grieve alone, go to your room if you're going to cry, grieve alone. T for time heals, just give it time. It'll get better with time. And then S is stay strong for others. You're the man of the house. You got to stay strong for your mom now. So all of those things that we've been taught with when we're sad and grieving, none of them are helpful with grief. They just prolong the sadness. They keep you struggling in pain. They keep you drinking wine at night, thinking that it's going to get better with time, when actually the reality is oftentimes grief gets worse with time.
Mm.
It gets better for the first, as your brain is readjusting and remapping to the loss, there is a certain amount of time heals that, like 6 to 9 months, time does make it better. That's just it does get better with time. But after that, after your brain has remapped and you've realized that the person's gone, and you're not constantly thinking about them in that jolt of wave of like terror and loss, once that starts to go away, then grief starts to get worse with time. And then people start going, well, how come the second year's were harder than the first year? I thought it was supposed to get better after the first year. Why is this third year even harder than the second year? I think I'm doing this wrong. There must be something wrong. I can't get rid of it. And then 25 years later, they come to see me and they're like, I can't get beyond my grief,
Wow.
because they have this idea that they're supposed to get beyond it, that they're supposed to feel better. And the fact is that it's just not true. We just get bigger and grow stronger, and we do that by processing it. But just waiting and thinking that time is going to make it better is causing so much pain.
So you're saying, everyone listen to this. You're saying we do not move on from grief. We learn how to navigate with grief.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a huge one. We don't overcome that. It becomes a part of us. The things that we're grieving will stay, and that's okay. And that's probably a huge thing that some of you needed to hear today. So, we've talked about the myths. We know a little bit about what grief is. What does grief need? If we're going to go on this journey of choosing to exist with our grief and choosing to show up with it every day, what do we need to do?
Okay. So grief, this is how the myths of grief we've covered. This is what you do for grief. Like when you're grieving, acknowledge it. I'm sad. And it's okay. I'm just sad. That is what you do with grief. I acknowledge it. Witness. Grief loves to be witnessed. So tell your friend, can you go on a walk with me? I just need to be with somebody right now in my sadness. That's why grief coaching is so powerful, because I can hold that space for people. So witnessing it, when you witness grief, you're not trying to make them feel better. You're not trying to fix it. There's no fixing grief. So you just hold space. That's all you have to do. I always tell coaches, it's really easy to be a grief coach because all you have to do is hold space. You don't have the answers. You don't fix it. You don't make them feel better. You just hold that space. So like words like, at least she lived a really long life, are not helpful. You can't fix grief. I can go on and on and on about how to hold space for someone who's grieving. In fact, I put a little link in there. It's a little freebie that I created on how to hold space for a grieving partner, if you want to go and check it out. But grief loves to be spend time in nature. The more quiet and grieving you are, if you can go out in nature and realize that we're not different from the trees and the animals and even the stars in the sky. Like if we can commune with nature and see that not everything is revolving around just us and our sadness, it can really be helpful. Quiet time and letting grief being with grief is so important, like embodying it, like feeling it, like when you're grieving, like where do you feel it? Look inside and go like, oh my God, I feel it right here. Most people say like, I feel like an elephant is standing on my chest. Let that be there. Feel it. Be with it. That's how you process grief. I didn't know how to process grief. I went for a walk. I went to the gym. I drank wine. I was like, I'm going to process my grief by going on this walk. That's not how you process it. How you process it is you go in and feel it and let it be there and almost talk to it like, I see you are there. Like the best thing that someone can say to me after coaching with me is they'll go like, I can't get beyond my grief from that to, if I didn't have this grief, I wouldn't have my mom anymore.
Mm. Wow. Chills.
Yeah.
Exactly. We get to live with it, right? It becomes a part of our journey. So we have about 5 more minutes, and we have one more topic that Susie and I are going to dive into, but we do have time. The reason why we only have 5 minutes left is because we do create time for Q&A. So at the bottom, you will see that there's a Q&A button. If this has inspired thoughts or feelings, or if you're like, wow, I'm dealing with this, what would you suggest? Please let us know in the Q&A, and we can give you live feedback specific to where you're at, or maybe just to a question that you have. You're like, is this even grief? Maybe it is. And if there are no questions, that's fine, but this is a perfect time for you to get the support without feeling like you have to really put yourself out there, right? So I want to talk a little bit more, Susie, before we jump into the Q&A about the research on what grief actually does to our body. Because I know that a lot of us understand the feeling, or maybe understand the feeling of avoiding the feeling. But I don't think that there's enough talk about what it is actually doing to our health when we don't process these emotions.
Yeah. Well, um, I can't remember all of the statistics, but the statistics are really high. Like if your spouse dies, you are 21 times more likely to die of a heart attack within the first 24 hours. It literally physically 21 times, not twice as likely, 21 times as likely to die of a heart attack after your spouse dies. Grief causes inflammation in the body. We have this huge talk about inflammation and how to lower our inflammation and cortisol. Grief creates inflammation throughout our entire body. It is when you are grieving, and you know how you like laying on the sofa and people call you and they're like, you just need to get out of the house. You just need to go, you just need to get up and do something. When you say that to somebody who's grieving, you're literally telling them, somebody that has the flu, to get up and go do something. You know how bad you feel when you have the flu? That's how bad you feel physically when you're grieving. Grieving is physically painful, like the flu. It takes everything out of us. And so that's where this compassion and being with grief is so important. Like, I'm grieving and I'm going to let myself grieve. Like, I'm not going to be hard on myself for this. Like, the last thing I want people to do is judge themselves for how they're grieving, because it's like judging yourself for how you have the flu. It's physically, it's physical, like scientifically physical. We hold it in our bodies.
I hear a lot of people say that they would like to be better than the version of themselves yesterday, which I agree with, but there's a caveat to that. For me, it would be I want to be better at holding myself than I did yesterday. Every day is different. We're going to feel different things every day. It is not a linear path, and Susie will tell you this over and over and over. Grief is not linear. No emotion is linear. But if you can be with yourself every day and be honest about where you're at and what you're going through, that is going to help you grow in so many ways, because every day will be different. There will be a day where you might bounce up and be like, okay, I'm ready to talk to my friends. And the next day you may be fully succumbed. And that's absolutely a part of the journey. So, Susie, we have 4 questions. So
Okay.
I don't want us to get too deep into them because I want them all to be answered. For those of you who asked the questions, if you feel like you would like more from Susie, I will drop her Life Guides profile in the chat. You get free one-on-one calls with her as much as you need, as much as you'd want. And it's not just Susie, it's all of our guides. So the first question is, so sitting with grief, it's similar to self-soothing for babies, but for adults? That's the question.
You know, I I don't really know the answer to that, because I don't know. I don't really know about parenting and sitting with babies. I mean, never had a kid. Um, I'm wondering, is the question sitting with grief when someone else is grieving? If you're talking about sitting with someone while they're grieving, yeah, it's just about holding them, holding that space. You don't have to say or do anything.
I think it's about like the self-soothing practice of like how do you make
Oh,
sure that you're soothing yourself, which I think if you look at the way that babies soothe themselves, there's a balance of it all, but um yeah, it is. It's a lot of that. It's a lot of holding yourself and like being like, okay, you can ease yourself back to sleep and it'll be fine. Um, okay, next question. And if you want to elaborate on that, you can elaborate on that anonymous attendee. Um, this one. So they say, so working out isn't a good way to process grief?
no, it is. Definitely it is. It's just that when we do it to avoid the feeling, then we can overdo anything. We overdo eating healthy, we overdo working out, we overdo working. A lot of us will overwork, we'll over clean, things that would be like, oh, cleaning the house is a good thing unless you're not processing your feelings. And so working out can be a crutch.
Beautiful. Thank you for that. This one's a little bit more, this one's a little bit more in depth. Any resources, and Franzi, this might be best set for you to schedule a call with Susie. We'll do our best to answer it here, but I have a feeling that you'll need a little bit more. So it says any resources you can share for dealing with a child, young adult, with a terminal cancer type, leiomyosarcoma, when you cannot do anything but support them and be there for all the chemotherapy poisoning. This comes after my spouse passing in his sleep of a massive heart attack. Oh my gosh, I'm getting tears in my eyes. Feeling like there's too much negativity coming at me that I have zero control. I'm a very analytical person. Thanks.
Yeah. What I will say is you have been initiated into being human very, very hard. This is like what I call a rough initiation. And just know that grief is layered. So you cannot process all of these things all at once. You can't be like, I'm grieving and I'm going to process my grief. We're going to take each thing layer by layer. And we do this through ritual. We do this through spending time in quiet, lighting candles, setting up an altar, connecting with source. That I think that's a big part of grieving, is you can find, if you can connect to something bigger than yourself. I mean, this is, yeah, schedule a session and I can walk you through some ritual stuff. I really do believe I missed that part about what grief needs. I don't think I said ritual, but that's like the number one thing. Grief needs ritual.
Absolutely.
That's why funerals are so powerful.
S- Um, yeah, so Susie's link is in the chat. For those of you who feel inspired by this conversation or you feel moved by it in a way of like, ooh, I might need that, schedule a session with her. The version of her that you get here is the same version that you'll get on a one-on-one call, but her attention will be focused on you and what your needs are and not necessarily what grief is as a whole, but what grief is to you and how to help you navigate through it because it is a unique journey for every person. And this is the last one before we close out, Susie. It says, I get confused by what it means to say I'm sad. And then what?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. I just wrote, I have a Substack and I just wrote this about this feeling that I have, this longing that can never be satisfied. And what is that? Like, am I lonely? I don't know. Like, does a fish know that it's in water? Like, what does water feel like to a fish? And sadness is very similar. I would recommend the book Bittersweet by Susan Cain for that question. Like, I did into doing parts work, I realized that my sad part, I have a sad part that likes to be sad. And I say that because I love sad music. I love sad movies. I love things that make me sad. And so that's just a really good question. So here's what I want to say about sadness is that we need it in this world right now, because that's where compassion comes from. If we're not sad about what's happening, then we're not going to change it. Because if we're happy, we don't change things. Compassion comes from sadness. So don't label sad as bad. Sad is like such an important emotion for the human experience. And for us to grow and to evolve, we have to have sadness in our lives.
Beautiful. Beautifully said. Thank you so much for your time and energy, Susie, and for being here and for helping us all navigate the universal emotion of grief that we've been taught to shy away from for so long. For those of you who are inspired by this conversation, Susie's direct link is in the chat. I would highly suggest booking a call with her. She will help you navigate through this with love and care and tenderness. And outside of that, we hope you have a beautiful week. We have our larger emotional well-being conversation on Wednesday. So if this type of thing inspires you, join us. I'll drop the link once more. And as always, thank you for being here. I didn't shout out the new people who are here, but shout out to all of you who this is your first time. I hope to see you coming back for more and more and more. Do you have any final words, Susie?
Yeah, just if you can't find a time with me, because my schedule is pretty limited, but I do have space available. If you call the concierge, we can figure out a time. So yeah, thank you so much. And I welcome you to meet with me, even if
Thank
you're not
you.
free. All right.
Thank you, everyone. What was the last thing I was going to say about that? There's a survey that pops up at the end. If you find that you need anything additional, there's a final box where you can leave comments. I look at it in 20 minutes and we can make sure that you're supported. Thanks, everyone. Have a beautiful week. Talk soon.
Bye.